Commissioners, I shared with you earlier that we intend to use this fall to modify our approach for presence reports. And in particular, we want to give you more in-depth understanding of where we are in each of our divisions. I'm going to recognize Bill Elmore to introduce this concept for you today.
Commissioners, let me take you back 2.5 years ago. In the spring of 2011, we presented to you our 5-year plan. And at the time, we started off by talking with you about a lot of the cost savings initiatives that we had put into place over the past 15 or so years. And we talked about the savings that had accrued and were continuing to accrue as a result of those programs. But we then moved on and talked also about our need to fund a growing capital improvement plan, one that we were calling Century 2, that was focused on the timely renewal and replacement of our assets in all 3 of our divisions, with the 4th division being covered under page 10. We talked with you about a lot of needs and the continuing needs that was going to present to us and the challenge that was going to present to us financially for a long period of time as we try to address that aging infrastructure. In our presentation with you that spring and going into the early summer, you all encouraged us to look at that in a little bit different manner than we had in the past. One of the things you wanted to look at was to get away from our traditional 5-year plan and look at a more long-term impact. And what we did was bring back to you in a financial planning session a 10-year program, a 10-year funding plan to address the electric and the water needs. Ultimately, you also asked us to look at a different approach in terms of funding. Specifically, you all suggested that it might be more palatable to our customers and better in the long range to look at more frequent but smaller rate increases as opposed to what had traditionally been our approach of holding off on rate increases for as long as possible and then implementing the increase that was necessary, which would have been larger, obviously, than it would have been had it occurred earlier. So in the past, when we had held off for 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, or longer in some cases, that resulted in sometimes rate increases that were a little bit larger than perhaps everyone would have felt comfortable with otherwise. So we came back to you ultimately and talked about a series of rate increases. We talked about annual increases and what those should be, whether it was a 3-year, 5-year, or longer period. And ultimately, the board approved a resolution that did 3 things. Number one, it endorsed the 10-year plan, a 10-year program for our Century 2. Not that it'll be finished in 10 years, but we had presented a 10-year plan, and you basically endorsed that plan. That resolution also committed to continue to fund budgets that included the necessary capital plans to address the Century 2 needs and the rate increases that would be necessary to support those programs. And lastly, the board did something that had not been done before. You approved a series of 3 consecutive yearly increases for both electric and water. Those increases were to occur in fiscal year 12, 13, and 14. It would be $1 a month for the residential customer, for each residential customer in water, and for each residential customer in electric. All but the last of those rate increases have now occurred. The last electric rate increase will occur next month in October. The last approved water increase will occur in January. So what that means is we're now at the point where we need to start talking with you in more detail about what comes next. The other thing we heard more recently from you all, probably at the end of last year's 5-year plan, you've been very complimentary and supportive of us in our 5-year plan presentations, but we've also heard that that's an awful lot of information crammed into a pretty short period of time. It's an extended meeting, but there's a lot of detail, a lot of complexity, and a lot of things we're asking you all to absorb and react to. So as Ms. Roach indicated, what we're doing this year coming back to you starting today. As soon as I'm finished here, Julie Childers, our Vice President of Engineering, Mark Rawhuff, our Manager of Water Systems Engineering, will be presenting to you detailed information on our wastewater system. Next month, we'll come back and do the same thing on gas, and we'll also have a gas and wastewater financial workshop. And then in the months to come, we'll do the same kind of thing, presenting to you our electric system and our gas system. And ultimately, in the spring with the 5-year plan, we'll come back to you with more information and asking for a multi-year rate increases for all 4 divisions. So that's where we're headed. Wanted to give you all a little bit of information so you'll better understand what to expect over the next several months, and hopefully this will help give you all the opportunity excuse me, to absorb it a little bit better, think about it a little bit longer, engage with us with questions, suggestions, and ideals, so that when we come into the spring with our 5-year plan and ultimately with the resolution on funding, everybody will feel very comfortable about where we are and where we're headed with this program. If you have any questions, I'll be glad to answer them. Otherwise, I'm going to turn it over to Julie and Mark to talk about the wastewater system.
This is the agenda of what I'd like to talk about today, beginning with EPA consent decree back in 2005, and then continuing on with our response to the consent decree, which started with communication with our customers, and then our rate increases and our budget increases at that time to fund the projects, and then the delivery of the required projects. Next, Mark Rawhuff, y'all will be doing the look back 10 years in 2003 to where we are today, and then a 10-year look forward, and then Mark Rawhuff will show some examples of some TV inspection and some sewer rehab that we do in our system. We'll follow that up with how we're going to be transitioning from our Phase 10 program into Century 2 for wastewater. Back 10 years ago, in 2003, it was a difficult time for the wastewater system. There are a lot of regulatory items that happened in 2003, beginning with a TDEC order for the beginning of the year. Then in the fall, the Tennessee Clean Water Network and the city of Knoxville felt like that TDEC order was not stringent enough, and they filed a lawsuit. Later that year, EPA offered negotiations, and that occurred over the next year, and that culminated with the signing of the EPA consent decree in February of 2005. So what were the requirements of the consent decree? Well, there are many things required, but I'm listing the major ones here. First of all, we had to address the repeat sanitary sewer overflows, or SSOs. Those are the ones that occurred twice or more during a 12-month period. And in order to do that, we had to accelerate the upgrades of both our collection system sewers as well as our wastewater treatment units. We also had to increase the frequency and type of sewer maintenance that was done. Another CD requirement was to improve how we responded to SSOs in both cleanup and in reporting those back to the regulators. A third component was the capacity assurance program. At this time, there was a lot of growth in the system, and they wanted to make sure that new developments that came on would not make the situation with SSOs any worse. A fourth component is our requirement to report to EPA on a regular basis when we finish our capital projects, how we're doing with our maintenance programs, and then also our progress on reducing SSOs. A final component that I'll list here is the development of an IRP, or Infrastructure Rehabilitation Program. And I'll talk more about this later in the presentation, but just for now, consider an IRP to be equivalent to our Century 2 program for wastewater. Even before the consent decree was signed, we started with communication with our customers. There were 6 Phase 10 community meetings held in the fall of 2004. We also provided speakers to go out to community groups like the Kiwanis Club or the Lions Club, and created a Partners Council. And that Partners Council still exists today, and we still meet with them. Several other items that were added for communication were our project hotline, very quickly, you can see how the budget compared prior to the consent decree, looking 2004 and earlier, versus when we started with the consent decree in page 10, 2005 and going forward. So there's a very large ramp up in our expenditures. And if you look at it, really neither one of these situations is desirable. If you look at prior to the consent decree, there was a lower level of rates and a lower level of funding. But the problem was the system was deteriorating faster than we could rehab it. When we had a delayed increase in our expenditures, that required a very steep increase all at once. And of course, that situation is not necessarily desirable either. In order to fund these increased project requirements, we had to do two things: raise rates and increase our debt. This shows how the rates were increased, two 50% increases early on in the program, followed by every other year of smaller rate increases, but still significant ones. We also funded these increased expenditures through bonds, and you can see that in 2006 is when we really started with increased debt in order to be able to fund our phased-in expenditures. We've looked at this chart a couple of times, once at the 5-year plan most recently, and what this represents is this is the total number of EPA required projects on the consent decree. Phase 1, which are all were due by June of 2013, amount to 126 projects. We had 23 in First Creek, 21 in Second Creek, and so on. Adding all those numbers together, you end up with 126 projects in phase 1. And we did complete those all before the deadline of June of this year. The second phase, which is due in June of 2016, there are 8 projects, and we've completed 6 and have 2 more under construction right now. Those 2 should be complete by spring of 2014. In addition to the collection system projects, we also had major upgrades required in our treatment plants. And this map shows the major drainage basins and where the sewer lines are located within them. So if you look at the Kawahi Basin and the treatment plant here, that's all shown in green. You can see it's our largest land area for a drainage basin, and it also has the highest density of sewer. On Fourth Creek, that's our second largest plant, and that's the one that you all saw on your tour, that you all went on the tour last month. If you combine the capacities of both Fourth Creek and Kawahi together, that adds up to well over 80% of our treatment capacity. You see our other 2 plants, Loves Creek and East Ridge, have an area that's maybe large in land area, but the density on the sewer here is quite a bit less. In addition to the treatment plant upgrades, we also added 6 storage tanks within the drainage basins as well, in the Kawahi and the Fourth Creek area. Those add up to a total storage area of 34 million gallons and represented an investment of $100 billion in the system. I want to go in a little bit more detail about our wastewater treatment plant upgrades. We had 4 major projects that had to be done on these 2 plants. Phase 1 at Kawahi was completed last December at a cost of over $50 million. The Fourth Creek Phase 1 is the one that you all saw under construction. That's due in December of this year, and it looks like we're going to finish that maybe a couple of months early. Then there'll be a Phase 2 at Fourth Creek that's due in 2018, which is a much smaller upgrade at Fourth Creek, and then a larger upgrade at Kawahi in Phase 2 that's due in June of 2021. So with all the work that's been done on the collection system and all the work that's been done on the wastewater treatment plants, it's a good time to look and see what actually remains left to be done on the consent decree. Well, as I mentioned, we have finishing up the last bit of the Fourth Creek wastewater treatment plant by December of this year. Then we have another big deadline in December of 2016. By that time, we have to finish those 2 Phase 2 projects, and we also have some maintenance deadlines as well. Sewer assessment completed, our private lateral assessment, manhole assessment, and stream water quality monitoring. And you can see that we're well underway on all of those.
you have to give that plan to anybody, or does it just have to have it in existence?
I believe that's something that the consent decree requires. They have to see the plan. So if you all remember, in 2006, a few of you all were here, we started our Century 2 program for water. And when we did that, we looked at the old types of pipe in the water system and the newer types of pipe in the water system. We looked at when they were installed, what the expected life cycle was, and then added those two together in order to obtain a replacement time frame. But with the wastewater system, it was somewhat different than that. We started out with a list of 126 projects from the EPA plus the 8. And so that was our beginning point. But going forward, we wanted to do the same sort of analysis that we did for the water system, for the wastewater system, as we did for the water. And so that's why we're looking at the similar analysis for our IRP. This is the basis for what we're recommending for the IRP. So if you look at the first two types of pipe, these are older types of pipe. Let's start with clay. It was begun installation around 1900. The last clay pipe was installed around 1955. So if you assume the clay lasts about 50 years, then the replacement time frame would be from 1950 to 2005. The interesting thing to note is that really all the clay should have been removed from our system before the consent decree began. But in actuality, right now, we still have about 40 miles of clay pipe out of a system that's about 1,250 miles. For concrete, a little bit different situation. The beginning point for it was around 1955, and the last of the concrete was installed around 1985. Also assuming a 50-year life on that type of pipe, the replacement time frame then would be from 2005 to 2035. And that's an important thing to remember when we look at a slide coming up in a few minutes, is basically the older types of pipe, according to this analysis, need to be removed from the system by the year 2035. And we also have 3 newer types of pipe as well. Ductile iron and plastic were installed beginning in the 1970s, and then cured in place liner started around 1990 or so with a small amount, and then that picked up quite a bit after the consent decree was signed. So we're going to look at these next 3 slides. We're going to look at a snapshot in time of what our sewer system looked like 10 years ago, where we are today, and then where we'll be 10 years from now if we continue on the same pace that we're at right now. So 10 years ago, before the consent decree, our system consisted of 75% of the older type of pipe, the clay and the concrete. We had a small amount of ductile iron and plastic as well, 25% virtually of those two. Where we are right now, 10 years later, after having 9 years worth of paste and work being done, the situation has changed to, instead of 75% old pipe, now we're down to about a half and half situation between old pipe and new pipe. So we've improved the situation quite a bit. Now the next thing we want to look at is if we continue on at the rate we've been doing, which is 2% of our system per year, or 25 miles per year. That's the rate we've been improving our system since the beginning of the program. If we continue on at that rate, then in 10 years from now, we will still have 1/3 of our system that has the old type of pipe in it, the clay and concrete.
I'm sorry. What percentage of that 33 is clay?
It'd probably be all gone in 10 years. That's what we're concentrating on, since that's the oldest pipe. At that point, it'd be almost virtually all concrete pipe. So this slide shows a summary of what we just looked at in the previous pie chart. Beginning with 2003, where we had 75% old pipe. Now where we are now, about half and half. And then in 10 years from now, at the same rate we're going, we'd be down to 1/3 old and 2/3 new. So that's quite an improvement, but it kind of raises the question, when do we get rid of all the old pipe? And so that's shown on the next slide here. It actually takes us all the way to the year 2040 at the rate we're going in order to get rid of all that old pipe. Now when we get to 2040, does it mean we're finished then? Well, not really, because at that point in start the cycle all over again with that plastic pipe and still continuing to invest in the system. So the important thing to realize here is that, first of all the old pipe will be done by 2040, and if you remember the previous slide where we showed the model replacement program being done by 2035 would be desirable. That's close enough for sewer years. That's a good match. So that's what we're recommending based upon this analysis. I'm going to talk a little bit more about the IRP. The IRP is really EPA's assurance that a utility will continue to invest in the system in such a manner that the system doesn't deteriorate, and so that we improve on our SSO numbers. So, based upon the previous analysis, the IRP for KUB would be to continue at the rate we're going at 2% of the system per year, which equates to 25 miles per year. This removes all of our old pipe types by the year 2040, and this is a similar analysis to what we did in Century 2 for wastewater. So why do we need to do it? First of all, it meets the requirements of the consent decree to have a sustainable life cycle replacement program. It also continues to reduce the infiltration getting into our system by eliminating the old types of pipe and upgrading to pipes that are more watertight. And of course, that demonstrates KUB's continued commitment to reducing SSOs without outside enforcement from EPA.
Is there a certain area of the county that would have more of that clay pipe than others?
A lot of the center city area has more clay pipe.
Center city.
And Williams Creek was one that had a lot of clay pipe. We've done a lot of work in Williams Creek and got rid of a lot of clay pipe there already. In addition to the capital programs, we also don't want to forget the maintenance programs. As I showed a minute ago, maintenance is part of the EPA consent decree, and so we want to make sure that those activities are carried forward into the future. Those activities include TV inspection, cleaning and flushing, root cutting, smoke testing, manhole inspection, and others as well. And the benefits of continuing with these programs are that it reduces the blockages and the SSOs. It identifies areas for us for future repair and replacement, and it also extends life of the assets going into the future. Next, Mark Rauhoff is going to show some examples of TV inspection and also sewer rehab techniques that we use in our system.
This map shows an area in South Knoxville near Mary Vestal Park. That, we have a 24-inch concrete sewer trunk line that's inside the park. It was installed in 1960, so it's over 50 years old, which is beyond its expected life of 50 years. We're planning on replacing this section of pipe. It's 225 feet in the next 3 months. So this project is ready to be constructed. And you'll see in the video that I'll show you here in just a moment why this line needs to be replaced. The video that you're about to see will show you the inside of this 24-inch concrete pipe. You'll get to follow the camera down the pipe and see what we see when we look at these videos each day. The video that you'll see will show the camera going into the manhole and then into the pipe, so you'll get to see that here in just a second.
Are the green circles manholes?
They are manholes, yes. Yes, and the manhole that we'll be looking at in the video to begin with is this manhole. It's not yet rehabbed, and this line is an old pipe. There was another project that happened downstream probably 15 years ago, and it actually did replace this manhole, so you'll see a nicer looking manhole when we get down to the end of the video. And there was just a short section of ductile iron that was installed there, and you'll see the difference between what needs to be replaced on the upstream side and this little section downstream. You'll see that in the video that I'm going to show. There's the brick manhole that we enter on the upstream side. The camera goes in there. A lot of information is collected. And here you're looking down the 24-inch pipe, and you're following the flow along with the camera. And you see some roots that are growing into the top of the pipe. So this pipe is probably 8 to 9 feet deep, yet those roots are penetrating this concrete material. Again, this pipe is over 50 years old, and this is when we think these types of pipe concrete roots growing in. And again, you can see the cracks in the top of this concrete pipe that let the roots come in, probably a joint right there where roots are growing through the joints. This would be considered a medium root barrel. Here you get more of a close-up of a crack along the top of the pipe. Again, this is a place where water can come in, and during either wet weather events or during rainy seasons, you have a lot more water coming in that we have to transport to the treatment plant and treat there. And as you can see, things get hung up on these roots, and that's what causes many of our blockages that occur and overflows that happen. And so that's the reason we're trying to get these roots to not be in our system. This is a lateral tap, and this is a tap that was actually installed purposefully, and it was a connection for someone to have their sewer lateral tied to the sewer main. But again, that sometimes becomes a point where roots and water can get into the sewer mains if they're not constructed well.
So the lateral is responsibility of the resident to take care of.
Correct. And you can imagine our pipes look like this at 50 years. If you've got a lateral out there that's been there for 50 years, you're going to have similar problems, and that's what our private lateral program helps us to address, are those problems. Here you'll see a long longitudinal crack at the very top of the pipe. And over time, this could cause the pipe to actually collapse and fall down into the flow stream and cause potential blockages as well. So not only are I&I infiltration and inflow sources evident here, but also roots that can catch things that would cause backups and overflows. And then you have pipe that is cracked that over time can collapse and cause overflow. So before all those things happen, we want to be able to go in and rehabilitate or replace these pipes. This is a large root mass. This is where we're shifting. This is the new pipe that I mentioned that had already been installed. So we're at the very end of this section. So there's where we begin to get into some ductile iron pipe. And so you'll not see any roots here, nor will you see cracks or inflow sources, because this pipe was installed more watertight and it has a longer life cycle. There's where the note was made that we've moved from concrete to ductile iron pipe. As you continue down the path here, in the distance you'll see light from a manhole. So that's where we're headed, to that downstream manhole. And this manhole has been rehabilitated. So you can see how much nicer it's going to look when we get there. It's got a PVC lining, and again, prevents corrosion over time from the wastewater gases. Also helps prevent water from getting into the manholes. The brick manholes tend to leak a lot more than the new rehab manholes. This is PVC pipe that was installed downstream 15 years ago, and then here's the inside, again, of a manhole. And there's the lid for the manhole to get into it. So this is an example of what we see when we televise the sewer mains. We rank those in the worst or the highest part of our list. This is one tool that we use along with other tools, and that helps form this IRP that Julie spoke about. We have we can upgrade our sewer mains either through the traditional open cut method. Usually this is necessary if the pipe is severely damaged, or it has sags in the alignment, or the flow cannot be handled because the pipe's too small. So this is the most disruptive and most expensive method, is the open cut method, but sometimes we can avoid having to do that. Another method that we can use to replace lines would be a trenchless method. And this is usually good for rehabilitating lines that are in relatively good structural condition, but they're leaking. A lot of the clay and the concrete pipes that need to be rehabilitated, these trenchless methods are good to use there. The two types that we primarily use are pipe bursting and then cured in place pipe liner. A third that's used less frequently is slip lining. And the two videos that we're going to show you next will help you to be able to visualize the first two methods of trenchless technology, the pipe bursting and cured in place. And they'll let you see see kind of what's happening under the ground when these things are being rehabilitated. Just to tell you a little bit about what you're going to see, these two videos are schematic, so they're pretty quick. So I want to tell you a little ahead of time kind of what's happening so you can at least follow what's going on. The pipe bursting, what generally happens there is a cable is on a winch near a manhole, and that cable is pulled through the pipe that's to be replaced. Once it gets to the other end of the pipe, there is a pipe bursting head that's there that this cable is attached to. You'll see that in just a moment. The pipe bursting head has been fastened to the new plastic replacement pipe. Then those two things, the pipe bursting head along with the pipe in tow behind it, is forced back through the old pipe, and that's how pipe bursting is actually taking place. So you'll see that in this next video. This is a pipe bursting head, a mock-up of that. And this is the area where the new plastic pipe will be inserted, and that grip will tighten up around the pipe to allow the pipe to be affixed to the pipe bursting head. So that's what it's demonstrating there. And this, the cutter blades are then installed on the pipe bursting head. There's different heads used for different types of pipe. And the cable that's been pulled through the old pipe is attached to the bursting head. And then that cable is then pulled back through a pit into the old pipe through a hydraulic machine that will pull that cutter head, which cuts the old pipe and pulls along the new pipe in its place. So this is clay pipe. A different head is used for clay. There's different techniques that the workers use to make this successful. This is what pipe bursting consists of. Requires a whole lot less digging. The winch pulls it on through, and then you have a brand new pipe installed where the old pipe once was. The laterals that are connected to the old pipe have to be reconnected. So there is still some digging that has to take place to dig down at the lateral location and reattach them to this new pipe. But the digging is a whole lot less with this method than the open cut. So there's times where we'll use this method. The second video that we wanted to show you is the cured in place pipe liner. And this takes place, this method consists of either water or air pressure forcing a sock-like tube down through a manhole on through the pipe. So it's almost like a sock. When you take your sock off at night, it is inside out, and this water is forcing this long tube through the pipe. Once it's completely through the pipe, water is inside of this tube. There have been resins applied to this polyester tube, and that water is heated up, causing these resins to harden. Once they're hardened, they become a new pipe inside of the old pipe. And it's as structurally sound as a new pipe, watertight, and that's what we're going to see an example of here.
100-year life.
It's anywhere 75 to 100 years. We've not had this method, Julie mentioned back in the 90s is when CIPP started, so there's been testing done, but we don't have any experience for that length of time yet, but we're projecting 75 to 100 years. So this is a picture of the old pipe, a cutout of what needs to be rehabbed. This truck houses the liner. Many times this is done at a manufacturing plant and not on site like this demonstrates, but ultimately it's delivered in a refrigerated truck that then has this tubing, and that's what this is showing, the tubing that has been saturated with this resin. The water is pumped into this tube, forced down through a manhole, and the water pushes this like a sock would be pushed all the way to the other end. This is showing the hoses that are used to heat up and put water in there that would heat the pipe. And so this is left for several hours under a certain temperature. Once that occurs, then the pipe becomes a solid pipe that formed inside the old pipe. Then a robotic cutter then is used in this situation to actually go inside of the pipe and cut out the old lateral. Many times this is done. Other times we actually dig on the outside and replace the lateral all the way and attach it to the liner. So there's two methods there, but then this shows you all the pipes that could exist beneath the ground that would hopefully avoid having anybody to have to dig when you do this liner process.
But if you have a tree growing and you have that stuff that comes through there, what happens to the tree roots?
We will usually go in and clean the pipe before the liner is placed or even before the pipe bursting occurs. So all those tree roots that we saw in the earlier video, they would be cut out. We have some cutters that go in there and remove all the roots and make sure that it's a clean pipe before the lining process takes place.
What determines which of those methods are gonna be the most favorable? I'm sure there's a number of factors, but if there are a couple that are the biggest determinants, what are the?
First of all would be, I guess, cost. We want to go with the least expensive to be able to do the most work with the money that we have. So we would look to the trenchless technologies because they're usually less expensive than the open cut. If the pipe is still round and doesn't have a lot of defects, then that works really well. If it's just roots or infiltration that cause the problem, you would want to line it or pipe burst it. If you have a lot of collapses or the pipe is actually falling in, many times the CIP